The Mediterranean was impossibly blue outside my cabin window when the notification chimed on my phone. I almost ignored it. I was on vacation after all, day 4 of the 10-day cruise I'd been planning for a year. A cruise my husband Mark had been too sick to join at the last minute. "Hope you're feeling better," I'd texted him that morning, the same message I'd sent each day since boarding in Barcelona alone. His responses had been consistent, still feverish, still miserable, still taking the antibiotics his doctor had prescribed for the severe sinus infection that had conveniently appeared 48 hours before our departure. The notification chimed again, Facebook this time, not a text. I swiped it open absently, expecting cruise ship Wi-Fi to be too slow for whatever vacation photos a friend was sharing from home. Thomas Chen tagged Mark Anderson in a photo. Thomas Chen, a name vaguely familiar from Mark's work. I tapped the notification, curious but unconcerned as the image loaded with painful slowness. And then I saw it. The photo showed a group of people at what was unmistakably the cruise ship's main pool bar. The exact bar where I'd had a mojito just yesterday afternoon. 5 smiling faces, cocktails raised in a toast, with Thomas's caption, "Unexpected reunion with old colleagues, making this cruise even better." And there, second from the right, was my husband. My supposedly deathly ill husband who had kissed me goodbye at home 4 days ago, apologizing profusely for missing our anniversary trip while coughing pathetically into a tissue. The phone slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, bouncing on the cabin's floral bedspread. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls of the small cabin seemed to close in as the truth came into horrifying focus. Mark was on this cruise. Had been on this cruise all along, just not with me. With shaking hands, I retrieved my phone and examined the photo more closely. The timestamp showed it had been taken yesterday. I zoomed in on Mark's face. He looked healthy, tanned, relaxed. Definitely not a man suffering from a severe sinus infection. And his arm was around someone's waist, though the person was mostly cropped out of frame. Just a glimpse of a floral sundress and blonde hair visible at the edge. I scrolled to the comments beneath the photo. "Great running into you guys," Thomas. "Highlight of the cruise so far," Mark. "Next round's on me," someone named Erica Mitchell. There were more photos in the album. I tapped through them, each image delivering a fresh wave of shock. Mark at a blackjack table in the ship's casino. Mark at what appeared to be one of the specialty restaurants I couldn't afford as a solo traveler. Mark raising a glass at the sail-away party I'd attended alone, fighting back tears behind my sunglasses. In 3 of the photos, I could see parts of the blonde woman in the floral dress, though never her full face. In one, Mark was kissing her cheek. The final photo showed them from behind, leaning against the ship's railing at sunset, his arm around her waist as they looked out at the ocean. The same ocean I'd been looking at alone, thinking of how much Mark would have loved the view. My phone buzzed with a new text from my husband. "Still feeling terrible. How's the cruise? Miss you." I stared at his message, the casual lie sending a wave of nausea through me so powerful I had to rush to the bathroom. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, my mind raced to process this new reality. My husband of 8 years was on this very ship, enjoying our anniversary cruise with another woman, while I wandered around alone, sending him sympathetic texts about his fictional illness. We were literally in the same floating city in the middle of the Mediterranean, and he had no idea I knew. Which meant I had 6 more days trapped on the ship with them before we docked back in Barcelona. 6 days to decide exactly how I would handle the fact that my marriage was apparently over, discovered through a careless Facebook tag that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Mark and I met 9 years ago at a friend's housewarming party. I was bringing homemade appetizers into the kitchen when he accidentally backed into me, sending my carefully arranged tray crashing to the floor. He helped me reassemble what could be salvaged, making self-deprecating jokes that put me at ease despite my initial irritation. "Let me make it up to you," he'd said after we'd rescued what we could. "Coffee this week?" That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into weekend hikes, which became a relationship that felt refreshingly straightforward after my previous dating disasters. Mark was kind, stable, and direct, an environmental engineer who approached our relationship with the same thoughtful consideration he brought to his work projects. "I like how uncomplicated we are," he told me 6 months in. "No games, no drama, just two adults who enjoy being together." That simplicity was exactly what I'd wanted after an engagement in my 20s that had imploded spectacularly when my fiancé decided he wasn't ready 3 weeks before the wedding. With Mark, everything progressed logically. Dating, moving in together after a year, engagement after 2, marriage in a ceremony that reflected our practical nature, small, meaningful, within our budget. The early years of marriage continued this pattern of thoughtful partnership. We established our careers, his in environmental engineering, mine in graphic design, bought a modest house in a neighborhood with good commute options, and built a life that balanced individual interests with shared experiences. We weren't the couple with the most passionate, dramatic relationship, but we had something I valued more: stability, mutual respect, and what I thought was complete honesty. When did things begin to shift? Looking back from the devastated perspective of my cruise ship cabin, I struggled to identify exactly when the foundation had begun to crack. There were no dramatic fights, no obvious red flags, just a gradual cooling that I'd attributed to the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. Maybe it started 3 years ago, when Mark's firm promoted him to a position requiring more travel. The separation created a subtle distance that never quite closed even when he was home. Or perhaps it was 2 years ago, when my desire to start discussing children met his increasingly firm preference to wait until the timing is better. "We're doing so well right now," he'd say whenever I brought it up. "Let's enjoy this phase a bit longer before we complicate things." Our sex life had gradually diminished, from the eager frequency of early marriage to once-a-week routine, then to occasional encounters that felt more obligatory than passionate. I tried addressing this directly last year. "Are you happy with our intimacy?" I'd asked one night after yet another perfunctory encounter. "Of course," he'd answered, though his eyes had drifted to his phone rather than meeting mine. "I'm just tired from work. The Anderson project is killing me." I'd accepted his explanation because the alternative, that he no longer desired me, felt too painful to consider. Instead, I'd focused on the positive aspects of our relationship: our shared friends, our comfortable home, our financial stability, our plans for the future. If physical passion had faded somewhat, wasn't that normal after 8 years together? This cruise was supposed to help reconnect us. I'd spent months planning it as a celebration of our 8th anniversary, saving carefully, researching excursions, even buying new clothes I thought Mark would appreciate. When I'd presented the gift, he'd seemed genuinely excited, marking off the dates on our calendar and researching ports of call, which made his last-minute illness all the more disappointing. 2 days before departure, he'd come home complaining of a headache and congestion. By the next morning, he was running a fever, his sinuses so swollen he could barely breathe. "You should still go," he'd insisted as I hesitated with my packed suitcase. "We can't get the money back and one of us should enjoy it. I'd just be miserable company anyway." I'd resisted initially. What kind of wife leaves her sick husband to vacation alone? But his insistence had eventually convinced me. "Please go," he'd said. "Take pictures of everything. It'll almost be like I'm there with you." The painful irony of those words now made my stomach turn. He was here with me, just not in the way I'd thought. Not in our shared cabin with the balcony I'd splurged on. Not holding my hand during sunset sailaways or exploring Spanish ports together. He was experiencing all of it, just with someone else. Someone he'd apparently brought on our anniversary cruise while concocting an elaborate lie to send me aboard alone. The logistical complexity of his deception made my head spin. He must have booked a separate cabin months ago, created a story convincing enough that I'd leave without him, timed his arrival to avoid crossing paths with me during embarkation, all while I'd been sending daily sympathetic texts and lonely selfies from scenic spots around the ship. Had our entire marriage been as much of a carefully constructed fiction as his supposed illness? Had I been living in a relationship that existed only in my perception, blind to whatever reality Mark had been experiencing instead? As I sat on the bed of my solitary cabin, scrolling through years of photos of us together on my phone. I no longer recognized the smiling couple staring back at me from the screen. Had we ever been the partnership I thought we were? Or had I been writing a story in my head that bore little resemblance to the truth? And now, trapped on this floating city with thousands of passengers, somewhere among them was my husband and the woman he'd chosen over me. I had 6 more days before we reached Barcelona. 6 days to decide who I wanted to be on the other side of this devastating revelation. After the initial shock subsided, a cold clarity took over. If I was going to confront Mark, I needed complete understanding of what I was dealing with. How extensive was the deception? Who was this woman? Was this a one-time indiscretion or something more ongoing? And most pressingly, what did I want to do with this information while trapped on a cruise ship with them for 6 more days? I began with what I knew. Mark was on board with a blonde woman. They'd been photographed together at multiple venues around the ship. One of Mark's colleagues, Thomas Chen, had posted the photos that exposed them. The woman's name might be Erica Mitchell, based on the comment exchange. Looking back at the Facebook post, I checked who else was tagged. Thomas Chen, Raymond Park, Melissa Jones, likely the 3 other people in the group photo. No tag for the blonde woman, suggesting either Thomas didn't know her well enough to tag, or more likely she'd untagged herself. Mark had either missed the notification or didn't realize I might see it. I navigated to Mark's Facebook profile. Nothing unusual. His last post was from a week ago, sharing a news article about renewable energy. He'd always been a minimal social media user, claiming he preferred privacy. That preference now took on new significance. Next, I searched for Erica Mitchell. Dozens of profiles appeared, none immediately recognizable. I refined the search by adding our city and environmental engineering, reasoning she might work in the same field. The results narrowed to 3 profiles, one with a profile picture of a blonde woman about my age. Clicking through to her page revealed a privacy-restricted profile. I could see only her profile photo, cover image of a mountain landscape, and a few basic details. Works at Mitchell Environmental Consultants, studied at State University, lives in our city. Mitchell Environmental Consultants. The name triggered a memory. Mark had mentioned this firm repeatedly over the past year as a potential collaborator on projects. Had he been working with her professionally before things turned personal? Or had the professional connection been a convenient cover for a relationship that began another way? For 15 minutes, I stared at her limited profile information, comparing her thumbnail image to the glimpses of the blonde woman in Thomas's photos. It could be the same person, but I couldn't be certain. I needed more evidence. Turning to practical investigation, I opened the cruise line's app on my phone. I'd installed it weeks ago for checking daily schedules and booking excursions. After logging in, I navigated to the deck plans, studying the layout of the massive ship. Our original booking was for a balcony cabin on Deck 9. Where might Mark be staying with her? The ship had over 1,000 cabins across 12 passenger decks. Finding them by systematic searching would be nearly impossible. I needed to narrow my approach. I reviewed Thomas's photos again, looking for clues. Several were taken at the pool bar, the casino, and one of the specialty restaurants, all public spaces that didn't indicate cabin location. But 2 photos showed Mark and the woman on a balcony, not the ship's main viewing deck, but a private cabin balcony. In the background, I could just make out a distinctive architectural feature of the ship's exterior that I recognized from studying the deck plans. That area corresponded to the luxury suites on Deck 11, significantly more expensive accommodations than our originally booked cabin. Had Mark upgraded himself and his companion while leaving me in our standard balcony room? The thought added financial insult to emotional injury. The investigation was providing pieces, but not the complete picture I needed. I decided on a more direct approach. Thomas Chen had tagged Mark, which suggested they were at least casual friends. I navigated to Thomas's profile and sent a message. Hi Thomas, I'm Mark Anderson's wife, Allison. I noticed you posted photos with Mark on the cruise. I'm actually on board too, but lost track of him in all the ship's activities. Could you let me know where you ran into him? I'd love to surprise him. The deception in my message made me flinch, but I reasoned that extracting the truth sometimes required strategic methods. While waiting for a response, I continued piecing together what I knew. Mark and I had booked this cruise almost 6 months ago as an anniversary celebration. For him to have arranged a separate cabin with another woman, he would have needed to contact the cruise line directly, probably creating a separate booking entirely, which meant this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision when he fell ill 2 days before departure. This was planned well in advance. My phone chimed with a response from Thomas. "Allison, great to hear from you. We ran into Mark and Erica at the Galileo Lounge last night around 10 p.m. They mentioned they were planning to do the Pompeii excursion tomorrow. Didn't realize you were on board too. Mark said you couldn't make the trip." Each word felt like another blow. Mark had told his colleagues I couldn't make the trip, a complete reversal of the story he'd told me. And he was planning a shore excursion to Pompeii, the exact excursion I'd been most excited about, that he'd known I was booking as a solo traveler. "Thanks, Thomas," I replied, my fingers stiff with suppressed emotion. Mark and I got our signals crossed, looking forward to surprising him. I closed the message thread and checked the ship's daily program. We would dock in Naples tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock a.m. The Pompeii excursion departed at 8:30 a.m. That gave me a concrete time and place if I wanted to confront them. But did I? The thought of creating a scene in front of other passengers made me physically ill. I had no interest in public drama, regardless of how justified my anger might be. And confronting them before the excursion would mean enduring an agonizingly awkward bus ride back to the ship, trapped with them and dozens of strangers for hours. As I deliberated, another piece of evidence arrived, a text from Mark. "Feeling a bit better today, finally. How was Malta? Were the streets as narrow as they looked in the brochure?" The casual lie sent a fresh wave of anger through me. Malta had been yesterday's port. He would have seen me there if he'd bothered to look. I'd wandered the streets of Valletta alone, taking photos I dutifully sent him, believing he was homesick in bed. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I focused on gathering one final piece of information. Opening the cruise line's customer service chat, I typed, "I seem to have misplaced my husband's cabin key. We're staying in separate rooms because he snores terribly. Could you please remind me of his cabin number? Mark Anderson." The customer service agent responded after a brief pause. "For security reasons, I cannot provide another guest's cabin number through chat. Your husband would need to add you to his reservation for access. I can see that you're in cabin 9234, and if you need a replacement key for your cabin, please visit guest services on deck 5. It was worth a try, though I hadn't expected it to work. The cruise line's security protocols were apparently better than their passengers' social media privacy settings. By evening, I had established several facts. 1. Mark was definitely on the ship with a woman named Erica Mitchell, likely from Mitchell Environmental Consultants. 2. He had told his colleagues that I couldn't make the trip, a deliberate lie. 3. They were planning to take the Pompeii excursion tomorrow morning, the same one I was booked on. 4. This deception had been planned well in advance, not as a last-minute decision. What I still didn't know was the extent of their relationship. Was this a recent affair or something more established? Was she aware of me, or had he lied to her as well? These questions remained unanswered, but I had enough information to make my next decision. After hours of investigation and deliberation, I reached a conclusion that surprised even me with its clarity. I would not confront them tomorrow. Not at Pompeii, not on the ship, not during this cruise at all. Instead, I canceled my Pompeii excursion and booked a different tour to the Amalfi Coast, departing at the same time. I would continue my vacation alone, documenting everything while maintaining the fiction that I remained ignorant. I would use the remaining 6 days to process my emotions, consult with a lawyer via email, and prepare for the confrontation that would happen on my terms, not in the middle of the Mediterranean where escape was impossible, but after we returned home. This decision wasn't about avoiding conflict or denying reality. It was about reclaiming control in a situation where I'd been systematically deceived and manipulated. Mark had carefully orchestrated this betrayal, timing it to his advantage. I would do the same with its exposure, choosing circumstances that allowed me dignity and preparation rather than reactive confrontation. As I settled into this plan, a strange calm replaced the churning emotions of the day. I opened my laptop and began an email to a divorce attorney my friend had used last year, attaching screenshots of the Facebook photos and Thomas's messages as initial documentation. The investigation phase was complete. Now began the longer, harder process of determining what remained of the life I thought I had, and what new life I would build from its ruins. For the remaining 6 days of the cruise, I lived in a strange parallel reality. On the surface, I continued as a solo traveler, taking alternative excursions to avoid Mark and Erica, dining in different restaurants, frequenting less popular areas of the ship. Meanwhile, I maintained the text conversation with Mark, responding to his continued lies about his improving health at home with brief, plausible messages that revealed nothing of my discovery. Each night, I documented new evidence, additional social media posts where I glimpsed them in the background, a photo of them together in Santorini that another passenger had inadvertently included in a ship Facebook group, the room service receipt that had been mistakenly delivered to my cabin, but was addressed to Anderson, Suite Lundvern 452. By the time we docked in Barcelona, I had compiled a comprehensive file of evidence and consulted with a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I had transferred half our savings to a new individual account, following legal advice about protecting assets without crossing into improper financial behavior. I had arranged for a friend to pick me up separately from the airport when we returned home, explaining only that Mark and I are having serious problems. The flight home was surreal. I deliberately booked a different return flight than our original itinerary, ensuring I wouldn't encounter Mark at the airport. During the 9-hour journey, I finalized my confrontation strategy, rehearsing what I would say and preparing for various potential reactions. When my friend Amy dropped me at our house the following evening, I felt an eerie calm. The home I'd left 11 days ago looked exactly the same, yet everything about my perception had fundamentally changed. I unlocked the door, noticing Mark's suitcase already in the entryway. He'd beaten me home. "Allison?" his voice called from the kitchen, followed by the sound of his approaching footsteps. "I thought I heard the door. Welcome home." He rounded the corner, arms outstretched for an embrace, face arranged in an expression of affectionate welcome. I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "We need to talk," I said simply, moving past him toward the living room. "Is everything okay?" He followed, concern creasing his features, the performance of the caring husband continuing flawlessly. "How was the rest of the cruise?" "The cruise was enlightening," I replied, setting my purse on the coffee table and removing my phone. "How about your health? Fully recovered from that terrible sinus infection?" "Much better, thanks. The antibiotics finally kicked in around day 4. I was so sorry to miss it." He settled onto the couch, still maintaining the fiction without visible effort. I remained standing, unwilling to share the intimate space of our furniture. "That's interesting because you looked perfectly healthy in all the photos." His expression froze. "Photos?" Without speaking, I pulled up the Facebook album on my phone and handed it to him. His face drained of color as he swiped through the images, recognition dawning of exactly what I had discovered. "Allison, I can explain." "Stop." I held up my hand. "There's no explanation that could possibly justify what you did. You weren't too sick to join me on our anniversary cruise. You were on the ship the entire time, in a luxury suite with Erica Mitchell while I wandered around alone, sending you concerned texts about your fictional illness." He set the phone down, his mask of confident control completely dissolved. "How long have you known?" "Since day 4, when Thomas Chen helpfully tagged you in his photos. I spent the last 6 days of the cruise gathering evidence instead of creating a public scene. I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with before confronting you." "I never meant for you to find out this way," he said quietly. "As opposed to what way exactly?" My voice remained eerily calm. "Was there a good way I was supposed to discover my husband was not only cheating, but had arranged an elaborate deception to vacation with his mistress on our anniversary cruise that I planned and paid for?" He flinched at the word mistress. It's more complicated than that. Erica and I, it's not just physical. We've been working together for over a year. I know. I've pieced most of it together already. I extracted a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. What I don't need are the emotional details of your relationship. What I do need is for you to understand exactly what happens next. The clarity of my approach clearly unsettled him. He had prepared for tears, for emotional outbursts, for the opportunity to manage my reaction with practiced responses. My methodical calmness left him without a script. I've consulted a lawyer, I continued. I've documented everything, the separate booking, the lies to me about being sick, the lies to your colleagues about me not being able to make the trip, the luxury suite you apparently felt comfortable spending money on with her while leaving me in our original cabin. Allison, please, we should discuss this. We are discussing it. I'm explaining the consequences of choices you made repeatedly, deliberately, over an extended period of time. I opened the folder and removed several documents. These are separation papers my lawyer prepared. They outline a temporary arrangement while we proceed with divorce. You'll be moving out of the house by the end of the week. Moving out? This is my house too. The first spark of defiance entered his voice. Yes, and you're welcome to fight for it in court, where I'll submit all this evidence of how you used our joint funds to book a luxury cruise suite for you and your girlfriend while crafting an elaborate deception to send your wife on the same ship alone. I maintained eye contact, unwavering. My lawyer thinks that will be an interesting discussion during asset division. He picked up the papers, scanning them with growing disbelief. You've planned all this without even giving me a chance to explain or apologize? An explanation or apology might be relevant for a single mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. This was hundreds of individual choices made over months. You didn't make a mistake, Mark. You constructed an elaborate fraud that required ongoing, deliberate deception. That reveals something fundamental about who you are and what our marriage really meant to you. For the first time, genuine emotion broke through his calculated responses. Not contrition, but anger. You don't understand anything about what I've been going through. Our marriage hasn't been working for years. I've been trying to find a way to tell you. By taking another woman on our anniversary cruise, I interrupted, my own anger finally surfacing. That was your solution to marital dissatisfaction, not counseling, not an honest conversation about your concerns, not even a straightforward request for separation. Instead, you chose systematic deception while maintaining the appearance of a committed husband. I never wanted to hurt you, he offered weakly. And yet you made choices guaranteed to cause maximum pain when discovered. The only thing you didn't want was to deal with the consequences of honesty. I gestured to the papers. You have until Friday to find other accommodations. I'll be staying with Amy until then to give you space to pack. You're being unreasonable, he protested. We can't just end 8 years of marriage without trying to work through this. I'm not ending our marriage, Mark. You did that the moment you decided to bring another woman on our anniversary cruise. I'm just handling the paperwork. I picked up my purse, suddenly exhausted by the performance of strength I'd been maintaining. Your choices have consequences. This is simply what they look like. As I turned to leave, he made one final attempt. Allison, please, I made a terrible mistake, but I do love you. We can fix this. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the man I had believed I knew completely. That's the saddest part of all this, Mark. You're still trying to manage my reaction rather than face what you've actually done. If you loved me, truly loved me, you would never have been capable of such calculated cruelty. Walking out the door, I felt a confusing mixture of devastation and liberation. The confrontation was complete, not the emotional catharsis of movies, but a clear-eyed recognition of irreparable breach. What remained was the longer, harder process of rebuilding a life fundamentally different from the one I'd believed I was living just 11 days ago. When I boarded a cruise ship alone, unaware that my husband was already there, hidden in plain sight with another woman. The initial weeks after confrontation passed in a blur of practical logistics and emotional upheaval. Mark moved out as required, taking only personal belongings and leaving without further argument, his initial defiance apparently replaced by recognition of his legally vulnerable position. Our communication became strictly transactional, limited to necessary financial matters and arrangements for dividing joint property. I returned to our home, now just my home, 3 days after the confrontation. The space felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, filled with memories now called into question by the revelation of Mark's double life. Had he been genuine in any of the moments captured in our framed photos? Had Erica been in his thoughts even as we'd planned renovations, chosen furniture, created what I thought was our shared sanctuary? These questions plagued me as I moved through rooms that had once represented security and partnership. In response, I began methodically reclaiming the space, rearranging furniture, changing bedding, replacing photographs with art. Not erasing Mark entirely, but transforming our home into my home, a physical manifestation of the personal reconstruction now required. Friends and family reacted to news of our separation with varying degrees of shock and concern. Some had noticed distant signs of trouble I'd missed or dismissed. Others were as blindsided as I had been. My parents offered to come stay, but I declined, needing solitude to process what had happened without managing others' emotional responses to my situation. Amy proved an exception. Her steady presence provided practical support without demanding performative healing or premature forgiveness. She helped with logistical tasks I found overwhelming, changing names on utility accounts, sorting through financial documents, researching divorce attorneys when my initial consultation proved insufficient. "You don't have to have everything figured out immediately," she reminded me during a particularly difficult evening. "Recovery from betrayal isn't linear. Some days will be productive, others you'll just need to survive." This permission to experience setbacks alongside progress became essential as I navigated the aftermath. Some mornings I woke with clear-eyed determination to build a new life. Others I could barely function through the fog of grief and disorientation. Both responses, I gradually recognized, were valid parts of the healing process. 1 month after confrontation, the divorce proceedings began in earnest. The legal process transformed intimate betrayal into clinical documentation, affidavits, financial disclosures, settlement proposals. This bureaucratic reduction of personal pain sometimes felt dehumanizing, but it also provided structure when emotions threatened to overwhelm. My lawyer, Rebecca Santos, proved invaluable during this phase, not just for legal expertise, but for her experience guiding clients through similar situations. "The legal system can't address the emotional injuries," she explained during our second meeting. "Its purpose is to establish practical foundations for moving forward. The deeper healing happens outside these proceedings." This perspective helped maintain emotional equilibrium during particularly difficult aspects, reviewing text messages between Mark and me during the cruise as evidence, seeing luxury suite charges on joint credit card statements, hearing clinical descriptions of matrimonial deception that couldn't possibly capture the devastating personal impact of discovering my husband on our anniversary cruise with another woman. 2 months after confrontation, an unexpected complication arose when Mark requested mediation instead of continuing adversarial proceedings. "I want to make this right," he claimed through his attorney, "or at least as right as possible given the circumstances." My initial reaction was skeptical, another manipulation attempt to minimize financial consequences or rehabilitate his image with mutual friends. But Rebecca suggested consideration. "Mediation often results in more satisfactory outcomes than litigation," she advised. "You maintain greater control over the process, avoid the expense and emotional toll of court appearances, and potentially resolve matters more quickly." After careful deliberation, I agreed to mediation with specific conditions: full financial transparency, no discussion of reconciliation, and separate arrival-departure times to avoid direct interaction beyond the mediated sessions. These boundaries established, we began the process of formally dismantling our legal partnership. 3 months after confrontation, during our second mediation session, Mark finally offered what seemed like genuine recognition of the harm he'd caused. "I know nothing I say changes what happened," he acknowledged, maintaining formal distance across the conference table. "But I want to state clearly that you deserved none of this. My choices reflected serious character failures on my part, not problems with you or our marriage that I dishonestly tried to claim initially. The acknowledgement, while insufficient to erase the damage, provided a certain closure, confirmation that I hadn't imagined the magnitude of the betrayal or overreacted to an ordinary marital difficulty. His recognition of the fundamental breach validated my decision to end the marriage rather than attempt reconciliation. 4 months after confrontation, we reached a settlement agreement that reflected the circumstances of our separation. Mark conceded the house and a larger portion of joint assets. I relinquished claim to his retirement accounts and business interests. The agreement felt neither victorious nor defeating, simply necessary conclusion to a chapter that had ended the moment I saw those Facebook photos. Throughout this period, I maintained minimal information about Mark's ongoing relationship with Erica. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned seeing them together, suggesting the relationship had continued despite, or perhaps because of, the dissolution of our marriage. This knowledge brought renewed pain, but also confirmed the affair had been meaningful rather than impulsive. Further validation that reconciliation would have been inappropriate regardless of Mark's professed remorse. 5 months after confrontation, the divorce was finalized with unexpected anticlimactic simplicity. A judge reviewed our mediated agreement, asked several perfunctory questions, and signed the decree that legally ended 8 years of marriage. I emerged from the courthouse into bright spring sunshine, my legal status transformed with the stroke of a pen, while my emotional reality remained complicated and ongoing. "How do you feel?" Amy asked, waiting outside as she had been throughout the process. "Unfinished," I answered honestly. "The legal part is complete, but the personal part? That's still in progress." She nodded, understanding. "The paperwork is the easiest part to resolve. The rest takes as long as it takes." 6 months after confrontation, I encountered Mark unexpectedly at a mutual friend's gathering, our first face-to-face meeting outside mediation since the night I'd confronted him with the cruise photos. The moment stretched with awkward recognition, neither of us prepared for unstructured interaction. "You look well," he offered finally, maintaining careful distance. "I am," I replied, surprised to recognize the statement as mostly true, getting there anyway. We exchanged brief, stilted pleasantries before separating to different areas of the party. The encounter, while uncomfortable, revealed significant progress in my healing journey. I could now see Mark as simply another person, rather than the central figure around whom my emotional life revolved. His presence generated discomfort, but no longer devastation. This shift represented meaningful transformation after months of processing, not recovery that erased what happened, but integration that incorporated the experience into a broader life narrative where betrayal existed as an important chapter rather than the entire story. 7 months after confrontation, I took a step that symbolized this evolution. I booked another cruise, this one a solo adventure to Alaska I'd always wanted to experience. Not to erase memories of the Mediterranean disaster, but to create new associations with travel and self-discovery. "Are you sure you're ready?" my mother asked when I shared these plans. "I'm not waiting for ready," I explained. "I'm choosing to move forward without letting his actions determine what experiences remain available to me." This perspective, distinguishing between healing from betrayal and allowing it to define my future, became central to navigating the aftermath. The cruise photos had revealed devastating truth, but they needn't become the lens through which I viewed all subsequent relationships or experiences. 8 months after confrontation, I began tentatively dating again, not seeking replacement relationship, but allowing connection with others after appropriate grief and recovery. These interactions revealed both lingering trust issues and surprising capacity for vulnerability despite profound betrayal. "Trust isn't an all-or-nothing proposition," my therapist observed during this phase. "Healthy skepticism based on experience differs from paralyzing suspicion that prevents any meaningful connection." This nuanced understanding of trust became foundation for rebuilding, not naive faith that ignored painful lessons, but considered openness that incorporated wisdom gained through difficult experience. 9 months after confrontation, I sold the house that had once represented our shared future. The decision wasn't primarily financial but psychological, a conscious choice to release physical space that continued triggering painful memories despite renovation attempts. The closing process generated unexpected emotional release. As I handed keys to the new owners, a young couple starting their own journey together, I felt tangible separation from the life that had ended with those Facebook cruise photos. Not complete healing, certainly, but meaningful progress toward whatever came next. Throughout this aftermath period, the cruise photos remained preserved on my computer. Evidence for legal proceedings, certainly, but also testament to a reality I'd needed to face. Not comfortable knowledge, but necessary truth that had ultimately forced growth I might otherwise have avoided. True healing began not with forgiveness or forgetting, but with acceptance, acknowledging what had happened without minimizing its impact or allowing it to define my entire identity. This process unfolded gradually, marked by both progress and setbacks, clarity and confusion. 1 year after discovery, I marked the anniversary not with bitter commemoration but quiet reflection. Sitting on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city park, I reviewed the journey from devastated cruise ship passenger to the woman I was becoming, still wounded in ways, but increasingly oriented toward future possibilities rather than past betrayals. Healing isn't about erasing what happened, my therapist Dr. Levine had explained during a pivotal session. It's about integrating the experience into your life narrative without allowing it to dominate every chapter that follows. This perspective guided my approach to recovery, not denying pain or prematurely declaring completion, but consciously choosing which aspects of the experience would inform my ongoing development and which deserved less continued attention. The practical aspects of healing proved more straightforward than emotional dimensions. Financial independence established through divorce settlement provided material security. Professional focus maintained during even the most difficult phases had resulted in career advancement rather than setback. New living space created physical distance from locations associated with betrayal. Emotional recovery followed less linear trajectory. Trust issues emerged in unexpected contexts, heightened skepticism toward casual explanations from friends, automatic fact-checking of minor claims from colleagues, hypervigilance about potential deception even in insignificant interactions. This heightened alert system is your brain's protective response, Dr. Levine explained. It's trying to prevent similar harm by identifying potential deception earlier. The challenge is calibrating this system appropriately, protective without paralyzing. Through sustained therapeutic work, I gradually developed a more balanced approach, watchfulness informed by experience rather than paranoia driven by trauma. Not returning to pre-betrayal trust patterns, which now seemed naive, but establishing new patterns acknowledging both human capacity for deception and authentic connection. 15 months after discovery, an unexpected development tested this evolving perspective. Through mutual friends, I learned Mark and Erica had ended their relationship. The connection that had justified elaborate deception and destruction of our marriage had itself collapsed within a year. The news triggered complicated emotions, not satisfaction or vindication, but renewed questioning of the senselessness of it all. What purpose had been served by such devastating betrayal if the relationship it enabled proved equally unsustainable? Their relationship's failure doesn't invalidate your pain or your decisions, Dr. Levine reminded me when I brought these thoughts to therapy. Betrayal of that magnitude revealed fundamental character issues regardless of whether their connection lasted 2 months or 20 years. This reframing helped process the information without derailing healing progress. Their relationship status remained ultimately irrelevant to my recovery journey. Interesting information, perhaps, but not central to my evolving narrative. 18 months after discovery, I experienced significant breakthrough during the Alaska cruise I'd booked as symbolic reclamation of travel experiences. Standing on the ship's deck, watching breathtaking glaciers under midnight sun, I realized hours had passed without thoughts of betrayal or loss. The first extended period of genuine presence without background awareness of what had happened. I felt fully myself, I wrote in the journal I'd maintained throughout recovery. Not as betrayed wife or divorce survivor, but simply as Allison experiencing something magnificent. The past existed but didn't intrude. That feels like real healing. This capacity for uncontaminated experience gradually expanded beyond vacation moments to everyday life, work projects engaged with full creativity, friendships enjoyed without constant comparison to relationship losses, new romantic connections approached with appropriate caution, but not paralyzing fear. 2 years after discovery, my professional success led to opportunity that would have been impossible within my previous marriage. A 6-month international assignment requiring relocation to London. The project aligned perfectly with my career goals and personal interests, yet would have generated significant conflict with Mark's expectation that my career remained secondary to his. It's strange realizing how much I limited myself to accommodate a relationship that wasn't what I thought, I observed during my final therapy session before the temporary move. The betrayal was devastating, but it also removed constraints I hadn't fully recognized. This perspective represented significant evolution, seeing the relationship's end not only as painful loss, but also as pathway to growth that might otherwise have remained unavailable. Not diminishing the trauma of discovery, but acknowledging unexpected opportunities that emerged from necessary rebuilding. The London assignment provided perfect transition into life's next chapter: professional challenge during working hours, cultural exploration during free time, new social connections without complicated history or preconceptions. The physical distance from locations associated with betrayal accelerated emotional separation from events that had once defined daily existence. 27 months after discovery, I returned from London fundamentally transformed, not just by professional accomplishment and international experience, but by comprehensive identity reconstruction beyond betrayed spouse to multidimensional person with expanded self-understanding. My return coincided with another milestone, the beginning of relationship with someone who knew my history but hadn't witnessed its immediate aftermath. James, a litigation attorney I'd met through professional connections before London, had maintained contact throughout my international assignment, our connection developing through thoughtful correspondence rather than conventional dating. I appreciate how you've integrated difficult experience without letting it become your entire story, he observed during our first dinner after my return. That kind of resilience reveals more about character than uninterrupted good fortune ever could. His observation captured something essential about the healing journey, not erasing betrayal's impact, but preventing it from becoming my defining characteristic. The experience had shaped but not limited me, informed future choices without determining them entirely. 3 years after discovery, life had established new patterns that acknowledged past experiences while remaining oriented toward future possibilities. Professional success continued expanding through opportunities that might have remained unexplored within marriage constraints. Social connections included both loyal friends who had witnessed the entire journey and new relationships formed with the person I had become through recovery. The relationship with James progressed with appropriate caution, but without paralyzing fear, trust developing through consistent behavior rather than assumed automatically, communication remaining direct rather than filtered through protective assumptions, mutual respect for independence alongside deepening connection. I'm not afraid of being hurt again, I realized during a weekend getaway to the mountains. I'm afraid of missing authentic connection because of walls built after previous pain. There's a difference between learning from experience and being imprisoned by it. This distinction between appropriate caution and self-limiting fear represented perhaps the most significant healing milestone. The cruise photos had revealed devastating truth about someone I had trusted completely, but they hadn't destroyed my capacity for meaningful relationship, merely transformed how I approached connection, replacing naive assumption with earned confidence. Throughout this healing process, the cruise photos remained preserved but increasingly unreferenced, reminders of necessary truth that had initiated profound growth rather than active focus of continued attention. Not forgotten, certainly, but appropriately integrated into broader life experience that continued expanding beyond their painful revelation. The healing wasn't complete in any absolute sense. Betrayal of that magnitude permanently alters perspective rather than becoming entirely irrelevant. But its dominance had diminished through consistent effort and intentional growth, gradually transforming from acute, defining trauma to significant but manageable aspect of personal history. 4 years after discovery, during another Mediterranean cruise, this one deliberately chosen to reclaim the experience that had revealed devastating truth. I stood at the ship's railing, watching sunset colors transform the same waters I'd viewed alone during that painful journey of discovery. The difference isn't just being here with someone trustworthy rather than alone, I wrote in my journal that evening. The difference is being here as someone who has rebuilt identity beyond betrayal's impact, able to appreciate beauty without constant shadows of past pain, capable of connection without paralyzing fear of deception. This moment crystallized the essential nature of healing after profound betrayal, not returning to who I'd been before, that person no longer existed, but evolving into someone with deeper understanding of both human capacity for deception and remarkable resilience in its aftermath. 5 years have passed since that Facebook notification changed everything. Looking back from this vantage point, I recognize that the path from devastation to transformation wasn't a simple journey from injury to recovery, but complex integration of difficult experience into expanded understanding of myself and relationships. The question people ask most frequently is whether I've forgiven Mark. My response has evolved from defensive rejection to nuanced reflection. Forgiveness isn't about excusing inexcusable behavior or pretending harm didn't occur. It's about releasing the energy required to maintain active resentment. I've forgiven in the sense that I no longer organize my life around what happened, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten its significance or minimized its impact. This perspective, distinguishing between pardoning actions and releasing their emotional dominance, represents one of many insights gained through this journey. Not understanding I would have chosen to acquire through such painful means, but valuable nonetheless in navigating a world where both betrayal and resilience remain fundamental human experiences. The divorce was finalized within 9 months of discovery, the legal process relatively straightforward given the documented circumstances. Financial settlement provided foundation for rebuilding, property division created necessary separation, and no-contact approach minimized ongoing trauma during transition. My professional trajectory evolved in unexpected directions following marriage dissolution. Without need to coordinate with partners' career or location requirements, I accepted advancement opportunities previously considered impractical, the 6-month London assignment, conference presentations requiring extensive travel, eventually partnership in the design firm where I'd previously maintained deliberately limited role to accommodate Mark's expectations about primary career prioritization. Sometimes the greatest growth happens in spaces created by painful losses, observed my mentor during partnership discussions. Not because the loss itself was beneficial, but because rebuilding required discovering capacities that might otherwise have remained unexplored. This insight captured essential truth about post-betrayal transformation. While I would never have chosen the devastating discovery of those cruise photos, the reconstruction they necessitated revealed strengths and possibilities previously subsumed within marriage-defined identity. My relationship with James evolved into partnership characterized by mutual respect, appropriate boundaries, and communication fundamentally different from previous marriage patterns. Not perfect union immune from difficulties, but connection built on genuine understanding rather than performative harmony. The difference is an absence of disagreement, I explained to a friend curious about relationship health after previous betrayal. It's how disagreement unfolds, with direct communication rather than conflict avoidance, with assumption of good intentions alongside accountability for actions, with commitment to understanding rather than controlling outcomes. These qualities, directness, accountability, mutual respect, became non-negotiable requirements in all relationships, not just romantic connections. Friendships deepened with those capable of authentic engagement, while naturally distancing from those preferring comfortable superficiality. Professional interactions improved through clearer communication expectations and appropriate boundary maintenance. Not coincidentally, these same qualities represented exactly what had been missing in marriage to Mark. His preference for appearance over substance, convenience over honesty, control over authentic engagement had enabled the elaborate deception revealed through those cruise photos. 3 years after our divorce, Mark reached out through formal email, not seeking renewed connection but offering final acknowledgement. I know better than to expect forgiveness or to minimize the harm my choices caused. I simply want you to know that losing our marriage remains my greatest regret. The consequences have been appropriately severe and the lessons painfully instructive. I wish you the happiness you deserve and always deserved. I didn't respond directly, but I recognized the message as part of my own healing closure, confirmation that appropriate consequences had manifested without requiring my active participation in their creation. His acknowledgement, while changing nothing about what had happened, provided validation that the breach had been as significant as my experience suggested rather than exaggerated perception. 4 years after discovery, during a professional conference in Barcelona, the city where that fateful cruise had begun and ended, I found myself standing at the same port, viewing the same massive ships that had once represented painful revelation and isolation. The experience triggered not renewed trauma, but thoughtful reflection on distance traveled since those devastating moments. The greatest insight from betrayal's aftermath, I journaled that evening, isn't about betrayal itself, but about identity reconstruction. The person boarding that cruise 5 years ago defined herself primarily through relationship roles: wife, partner, potential future mother. The person standing at this port today recognizes those roles as aspects of identity rather than its foundation. This distinction between relationship-defined identity and self-defined identity that includes but isn't limited by relationships represented perhaps the most profound transformation emerging from betrayal's aftermath. Not that relationships matter less, but that authentic connection requires first knowing oneself independently before linking identity with others. 5 years after discovery, life bears little resemblance to what existed before Facebook revealed those cruise photos. Professional success has exceeded previous expectations. Social connections reflect deeper authenticity requirements. Romantic partnership demonstrates possibilities beyond previous relationship limitations. And personal identity encompasses expanded understanding of both vulnerability and resilience. The woman who boarded that cruise alone, believing her husband was homesick, couldn't have imagined the life she would eventually build from the ruins of that devastating discovery. Not because the revelation itself was beneficial, it represented profound breach of fundamental trust, but because reconstruction required discovering capacities that might otherwise have remained dormant beneath comfortable but limiting relationship patterns. For those experiencing similar betrayal discoveries, whether through social media, chance encounters, or direct confession, I offer this hard-won wisdom. The pain you're feeling is real and valid. The disorientation when fundamental trust is violated represents appropriate response to profound breach. The questioning of your own judgment isn't weakness, but necessary recalibration after significant misperception. But beyond these painful realities lies potential transformation, not immediate or easily accessed, but gradually available through consistent choices to remain engaged with difficult truth rather than retreat into comfortable illusion. Not return to who you were before betrayal, but evolution into someone with deeper understanding of both human capacity for deception and remarkable resilience in its aftermath. This transformation doesn't happen easily or quickly. It emerges through sustained effort, appropriate support, and willingness to integrate painful knowledge rather than minimize its significance. It develops through balancing legitimate caution with continued openness to authentic connection. It manifests in relationships characterized by earned trust rather than naive assumption. The cruise photos that revealed my husband's betrayal ultimately exposed more than his specific deception. They illuminated the danger of relationships built on appearance rather than authenticity, the limitation of identity defined primarily through connection to others, and the possibility of reconstruction not despite devastating knowledge, but because of the clarity it eventually provides. And perhaps that's the paradoxical gift hidden within painful revelation, the opportunity to build something authentic from the ruins of comfortable illusion, something sustainable in its acknowledgement of human complexity, something resilient precisely because it incorporates rather than denies the possibility of betrayal. Not a story of simple recovery that erases what happened, but transformation that integrates difficult truth into more conscious, authentic living. If you found value in this account of betrayal and reconstruction, please consider sharing it with others navigating similar discoveries. Your comments about related experiences or questions about healing afterward are welcome. This community has become a vital source of support for many walking parallel paths. And if you're currently experiencing the raw devastation of similar discovery, please know that while the pain you're feeling is real and appropriate, it need not define your entire future. Beyond the disorientation of betrayal lies the possibility of rebuilding, not despite difficult knowledge, but because of the clarity it eventually provides. Thank you for listening.